Previous lecture, we saw and learned the basic components of curve, what the curves are made of, what are the different components in the curve in Lightroom. In this lecture, we will see how to use it and what it represents. By default, the tone curve panel will be something like this. And in the bottom, we have 4 sliders for highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. And also we will have the same things in the graph, also represented by these teardrops. Similar to lights sliders, dark slider, or highlights, in the previous lecture that we have learned, we can control the amount of light that is in the image by these sliders. But we won't be using the default setting for the curve, and we will switch over to point curve. To switch to it, we just click in this button on the left corner. We see that we have a diagonal line and some x-axis and y-axis in here. In the middle, we have these data that is plotted for us. These are the brightness information of our image, all of it. At the left part, it represents the shadows. At the right part, it represents the highlights, as we have discussed in the previous lecture. For this particular image, at the right side, we see that we don't have any information in here. What it means is that in this image, we don't have extreme brightness or extreme bright areas in our image. And also in the left side, we see that we don't have extreme dark areas in our image. This is good. It means that we can recover all the details from the every parts of our image. And this should be your goal when taking pictures, that to avoid having extreme dark areas and also extreme bright areas, because that areas don't contain any details that you could recover in the editing. From the previous lecture, we know that this point represents extreme brightness and this point represents extreme darkness. Since we don't have extreme brightness in our image, we can drag this point and bring it right around here. To start using tone curve, we can use this to select or to specify. We can create arbitrary points in this line in every part of it that we want by just clicking on it, and it will create a point just like this. As we learned that if we drag it upward, it will brighten up those areas, and if we drag it downwards, it will darken that areas. If we want to delete a specific point, just double click on it and it will be deleted, and the curve will be reverted back to its original form. Let's just delete this, and we will be using this picker to pick the areas or the brightness levels that we want to change. For best results, almost select the brightest area of your image and also the darkest area of your image. As you see that these 2 points, this represents all the tones that are with similar brightness with this part. If you drag it downward, you will see that the areas that are near that brightness is getting darker. Areas like this, like here, and these areas. As we see that when we are dragging this downward, all these areas are also affecting. To minimize the unwanted change in other tones, remember to put necessary points to minimize the effects. For example, we will add a point for the midpoints also. Now when we are dragging this downward, it will have a minimum side effects on other tones. And just these dark areas are getting darker. And in this image, since we want to recover some details in these areas, I will drag down these that represents the highlights. It also affects other tones too. To minimize that, we will add a point. For now, when we are dragging this point, all the areas that are below that will be affected. Means areas from this to this area. And yeah, just like that, you can edit different tones of your image with tone curve. We see the before and after. These areas are getting darker, represented by this point, and also these highlights are getting darker, and we can see some details in there. In other example, in here we see that the tone curve, there's a lot of details, there's a lot of data in the right side of the image. It means that image contains lots of bright areas, lots of highlights, and there is some details also in the shadows also. But for the midpoints or the midtones, you see that there isn't too much details. It means that the most of the image is either related to highlights or shadows. So as we said before that while taking pictures, we should prevent having extreme brightness. But in our case, since there's direct sunlight, we will have some extreme highlights in our image because of this area. Since we want to recover data from these points, we need to add a point at the extreme highlight to see that these areas are extreme highlight and the point is right here. And if you add it, it will not add another point because there is already one point present. We will find some areas that are not that much bright and it's not blown out. It's like this. And also some point for the shadows too. For the midtones, since there isn't too much midtones, I will add it myself. So we want to recover details in these areas. Drag this point downwards and we are starting to see lots of details in these areas. But in this area, since there's direct sunlight, we do not see any details because our camera could not capture any details in here. It's just blown out and it's completely white. So this is the before and this is the after. And for the shadows, we will be dragging it a little bit downward to create a contrast, just like this. And another point in this area, since I want the subject to be a little bit visible. So another point for this, just like this. So here's the before and here's the after. You see that we have recovered lots of information from this image. In this example that we are seeing in the tone curve area, that there is no details in the bright areas. It means that there isn't any areas that are too bright. And we see that there are some details that are too much dark. It is probably these areas that are completely black. So just like always, one point at the brightest area and one point at the darkest. We didn't want to select extreme black because Lightroom will not add another point areas that point is already exist. So, and also another point at the midtones, which is probably like these areas. And let's see an experiment with the bright areas, see which values works with this image. In this image, I want it a little bit higher. It means that the tones that are below this curve, this point, will be brightened. And it's also represented by this curve. We see that the default one is straight and we have added brightness to that areas. Similarly, we want to add some contrast to this image. So we will darken the shadow parts. So to do that, drag down this point and we are starting to see the results right away. And yeah, this image didn't need anything. So we just added some contrast and we see the result in here. This is before and after. The next thing that I want to show you in the curve is that while editing using curves, you will be also affecting the colors of your image. What I mean is that when you are darkening your image, you will be also adding saturation to the colors in your image. In here that the colors also getting saturated and we are editing colors also. So while using the tone curve, keep these points in your mind. And yeah, that was it for this video. I hope you learned something and added to your knowledge. In the next video, we will be learning how to add color in our photos using tone curve. And see you in the next lecture. Have a good day.